written for news outlets like The Guardian and The Telegraph and The Times, and why you began writing fiction and when.
So I reckon I can't remember knowing how to write without without the memory of just writing stories. Literally, as soon as I can remember writing, like full stop, putting pen to paper, I was filling notebooks with stories. So, and I think a lot of writers that I've come across are not like that, and they'll be like wildly successful, brilliant authors, but actually they didn't kind of try and write a story until they were like 25 or something, which I'm fascinated by, that because for me it was the compulsion, and I don't know, I've thought so much about where that compulsion comes from. And I don't know, I guess.
What's your earliest memory of writing a story?
Yeah, okay, so I have we had these spelling books, and if we ever got a word wrong at school, you know, it would be, each page had a letter of the alphabet, and with a picture like A for astronaut. And I was spelling nerd, so like it was quite an empty book. And so I just took it home and filled it with stories. And I remembered that book, and I remember I was probably 5 or 6, and I remember being in my friend's house, and she was playing with my sister, who was also over for the play date, and I was just sitting there just filling this book with stories. So yeah, that memory is like burned into me. I don't know, it's so strange. It's like, it's obviously a very kind of compulsive drive for a lot of people. And I wonder if a lot of it is to do with freedom, because writing fiction is such a great form of freedom. It's kind of
do you think you get your inspiration from the ability to just be free with your writing, or is it?
I think it's funny because a lot of the time I just think it's amazing that I'm able to do this, because you're basically just going off on one in your head, in your imagination, and you're allowed to call it a job. And it seems like a bit of a joke sometimes, but yeah.
So what do you think is the main difference between writing, you know, for factual outlet, and then having the creative outlet of, like, you know, just being able to write for your own freedom? What do you think the main difference is?
I love writing nonfiction, and I love writing like an academic essay, and I also love writing, you know, more kind of a journalistic essay. I like the kind of structure and the research, and the way you have to read around, and then you kind of narrow down into what you want to say. And you know, fiction writing, I talk about that freedom, but it's also a huge amount of kind of discipline and structuring and nitty gritty. So it's not just kind of pure flight of fancy, but I would say so there's a lot of overlap in a way in what happens, but fundamentally I don't have this overwhelming urge to do the former. And I do, or rather, when I'm not writing fiction, if I'm not having the chance to write it, I feel like I'm suffering as a result of that.
Okay, so you talk about an urge. Now, I'm really intrigued by that, and I'm fascinated by the urge that a lot of fictional or authors talk about when they talk about their novels being published. An urge to sort of like get their characters down on paper. Did you feel that when you started writing? At the age of 4?
My really complex astronaut character. It was definitely an urge. And now the way it comes to me is, again, I can't sit down and think of an idea and then feel interested in writing that. It has to really frustratingly, I just kind of have to wait, and a character will, or a sentence, or a place even will come, and there'll be the right thing to sustain my interest, and then I start writing. But yeah, I think what's really scary about it as a job is that I never really know when that's going to come. No. And some authors are brilliant at just being able to sit down and come up with a concept. Yeah. But I can't do that.
So I find it really fascinating. I once read that in your previous interview, you said, once the writing and editing are done, in a very real sense, the novel is no longer yours.
Yeah.
In that case, what do you think the purpose behind your writing is, and how do you feel about letting a novel go?
Yeah.
And do you still stand by those words?
Yeah, I do. I think in my case, I won't really share my writing with anyone while I'm in the thick of it. And then there's this point at which you have to release it to kind of your first gatekeeper. So it might be my agent or my husband or like someone I really trust, right? And as a reader as well as a person. And but that process, even just that tiny process of letting go to that person, is difficult enough.
Is it scary?
Yeah, really scary. Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
It's so exposing, and that's, I think, ultimately what's really scary about letting the book go full stop. Number one, it's so exposing. Like however far away I am from my characters or from the storylines, I'm still revealing, not if not the way my mind works, at least a way in which my mind works. And that's a weird thing to show the world. But the other thing about it being scary is, I guess, that you can't, when you're writing, you never have to defend what you're writing. And that's a good thing. And you can never defend it once it's out there in the world either. And that becomes a very scary thing then, because I think, you can't control how a reader is going to interpret something, whether they're going to dislike a character or like a character, believe in something that you set up, go along with it, and there's no way that you can interfere in that. And I think whilst that's really terrifying, it's also definitely what I love about writing, that it doesn't just stay mine.
Yeah.
It becomes completely something that belongs to someone else, and it might resonate with one person in a totally different way from how it resonates with another. I think that's really cool as well.
Yeah. My dad is a very aloof man.
Yeah.
He's very stiff upper lip.
Yeah.
And so in your in both of your novels, we've got these very powerful, strong male figures.
Yeah.
And so it comes back to that idea of like how you interpret your characters.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I mean, going back to the father figures, why did you choose to make them both so powerful?
Yeah, I guess it's weird because I would say I didn't have a straightforward relationship with my own dad, but for actually very different reasons than these two patriarchs in the novels. They are very different. Like, my relationship with him was very different from the relationships that these two characters have with their children. But I suppose with Don, who's the patriarch in The Unwilding, and Jerome in Nightingale, they both to such a degree embody patriarchal power, not just power as a father, but in a really real sense, the kind of the power of being a wealthy, successful white man, in a certain kind of world. And with Jerome, I don't know how, it'd be interesting to know like whether you warm to him in spite of yourself, or like how that would compare to Don. Not that they're the same character, but in terms of their kind of their power,
aloofness, and the way they rule over their children in some way. Yeah.
But with Jerome, because of his age and his isolation in his setting and his estrangement from his kids, and also his physical frailty, he's really having to come up against the fact of his own vulnerability in a way that Don, in The Unwilding, Don never has to, which is frustrated me as I was writing it. And I'm sure it probably frustrates some readers.
Yeah.
He never kind of has his reckoning.
Yeah.
In a way, he just gets away with it. He holds the keys and he keeps the keys.
I mean, I found
and no
that,
one challenges that.
I
Ultimately.
found that quite interesting in terms of the difference between two men. And as you said, like, I found myself warming towards Jerome, although I can imagine it being very frustrating to be his son or daughter in some ways. But you also get this element of frailty and this element of almost innocence or childishness that comes through towards the end, you know, with his age.
Yeah.
And I suppose I wanted to go back to that. You said you didn't have a great relationship with your father. Did you have to draw on any of that emotion in order to write those characters? Did you have any forgiveness towards your own father, or did you?
I don't know. I guess probably subconsciously I must have drawn on certain elements of that, but I think what is so screwed up about both of these relationships is that these relationships these men have with their children is that their children, even as adults, cannot help but crave some kind of connection or approval. And so, though my own experience hasn't been of a Don or of a Jerome, I certainly have really tussled with that and seen, you know, really powerful friends of mine who are just kind of brilliant, indestructible seeming people in so many ways, just completely, you know, rendered so helpless by needing to
the validation,
still to get the validation of a grown up who, like, to them, who I can see from the outside is not, you know, does not merit that level of kind of power over this person. But I mean, I find that such a fascinating thing to explore.
Yeah. And then in your two books, you've also got other male characters who are a lot softer and a lot more easy to warm to, let's say.
Yeah.
What was the difference, did you find? And like, what kind of compelled you to write those characters?
Yeah, I guess I think masculinity is so fascinating. It's changing a lot. It has changed a lot over, you know, the last 20 years. And I think it's a subject that I'm definitely not done with, but trying to explore, I guess, the kind of the freedom that it allows, the kind of passport that you have just by being a certain kind of man.
Yeah.
But also the real strictures that there are and the limitations that and kind of shackles of masculinity as well. I think for, you know, you talk about the softer characters of someone like Henri in Nightingale. He's so shackled by.
I love Henri.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. I love him so much.
And because, you know, do you think he was your favorite to write?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, and because he's in many ways he's kind of a very straightforward character, and he lives by he has these very clear values and principles, like honesty and integrity and work ethic, and even the way he views life and death and living and dying, and yet he can't live by those values himself because he's kind of ingested this basically homophobia that from his background, from the world around him, that he's turned upon himself. And so he's kind of, and I think it's that his kind of struggle to live in accordance with the values that he loves and believes in, that I think just kind of torment him so much. And yeah, I suppose that is kind of a crisis of masculinity in so many ways.
Oh my goodness, yeah. I I wonder if one of the reasons why I felt myself connect with Henri so poignantly was because of the fact that I have a very close friend who kind of battled with his own sexuality for so long, and sort of, as you said, battled with the homophobia and inwardly turned that towards himself. Did you kind of have any experience with that, like in terms of in your writing, or did you what did you have to draw on in order to get into that headspace?
I suppose I've kind of thought about that. There have definitely been people that I've known who I've felt so moved by a very similar sort of predicament. But I think also sexual shame is something, so not even that specific form of sexual shame, but like sexual shame full stop is something that so many people who I feel close to have been tormented by in some way at some point. And so although his particular experience is, quite specific to his circumstances in terms of like, the world around him, the kind of values within that village and that particular setting and within his family and stuff, it's the kind of the shame and the reckoning that he has to go through and how trapped he gets by that shame. I feel like that's something I've definitely encountered in so many people.
So you mean like as in male and female?
Yeah.
Do you think that's something you're going to explore going forward?
I think so.
Because you did it a little in Nightingale. With the affair that takes place. I don't know if that's a spoiler.
Yeah, very true.
But
and Tree, the protagonist's oldest sister, is someone who is kind of trapped by a kind of repeated sexual behavior that she doesn't feel in control of. And so, that I think people respond in such different ways to the shame that arises from that. Some in kind of self-destructive ways, some in really self-isolating ways.
And I find it so intriguing because you're a mother of 3 beautiful little children. How do you think that they will sort of respond to these novels as they grow up and read them? Because
I don't know. I think about it quite
write
a lot
in the headspace of 9-year-olds. And so I'm just so intrigued with your children. How do you think they'll grow up to respond to it?
Weirdly, my 6-year-old was asking me, I think it was yesterday, whether she could read The Unwilding. I was like, to begin with, you'd find it really boring. It doesn't have any pictures in it. But also, no, you can't. Absolutely not. I have a niece who's 13, and I got a card when The Unwilding was published a few weeks later from her friend, who I've known since she was kind of 4. And her 13-year-old friend had read it, and she just sent the most beautiful response to it. And that, I think, that felt so incredible to have, I don't know, to feel like this could reach a young adult, because it's quite an adult book in most ways. But yeah, I don't know. In terms of my own children, God, that's different, isn't it? I'm sure they'll cringe at any of the sexual content
when they're allowed to read.
God, I'm going to ban it.
Ban it in the household.
Yeah.
But in terms of, for example, in The Unwilding, you've got the beautiful character of Nemini, who you write. What is she, 9 years old when you start writing? How did you get into that sort of headspace? And you've got 24-year-old in Nightingale as well. I find it really, really. I would find it really difficult to get into the headspace of writing these characters. How did you do that?
I wonder. I think maybe children are so interesting. Nemini, she's just turned 10, I think, in the novel. She's an intelligent, very observant child. So she sees a lot, and and she understands, I think, a lot more than grown-ups might give her credit for, which I think is true of all children. Which on the one hand makes them a bit easier to write than you might think, because they're actually kind of a lot more adult than I think we remember that they are.
Yeah.
But I think with that kind of age, there's this real fascination for me between what they're seeing a lot, and they're actually understanding quite a lot, and yet these are necessary lacunae in their understanding, and that is such a kind of maddening and frustrating and terrifying friction point, isn't it, between, as a child, between your knowledge and your just kind of, you almost know up to a certain point and then you just fall off a cliff, and there's just this kind of vast world that you do not understand.
You portrayed that so beautifully as well. You also captured like the sense of when you have older siblings and they kind of leave the younger ones out so well as well. I know, even being a twin, but like a younger twin, it can be so different. To feel like, oh, you can't be part of this conversation. You're not old enough. So yeah, definitely. I noticed that in both of your books there is a very striking, like almost solitude and sort of melancholy. Why do you think that is? And do you think that there are day-to-day things that happen in your life where you have to sort of turn to these themes, or do you think that you just naturally are drawn to them?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, I think probably I'm quite naturally drawn to those themes. I think solitude is definitely something that I kind of crave and seek out a lot as a person, and yet also something I'm probably get a bit afraid of if there's too much of it. I think perhaps when I'm writing fiction, a lot of what I'm trying to do in some way is work out this problem of the fact that we're all essentially alone, and that we're all and I think to kind of explore like the aloneness of people, the inevitable aloneness of people just based on their circumstances or their perspective, but then also to explore these kind of amazing moments of connection that we can have, and when little bridges can be made between our.
Well, that's the thing, because it feels quite like the settings and the characters, they do feel quite alone at times, and there is that very melancholic solitude inside the books, but then it almost heightens those moments where they go to the village, or they have the moment where they connect, or whatever, in such a way that's so beautiful. Do you think that that's something that you aim to do intentionally?
I don't think so. I think in a way there's very little that feels intentional about my writing. It's always a little bit post hoc when I'm looking back and trying to work out what I did, but I'm sure there is that. I think when Marguerite and Henri form their connection, they have this incredible connection that happens kind of against the odds, and that writing that felt just like such a wonderful thing to be able to do. For me, like, they're as real as real people. They feel as real when I'm writing them, and so I felt like I was letting them have this kind of this incredible moment of happiness, But yeah, I would say probably I'm not intentionally setting out that, connection is perhaps the thing that, like, those moments of connection, things that I perhaps most enjoy writing.
Yeah. And then you mentioned before that you're not a fan of sort of sharing your work with other people before you feel that you've gotten it to a point where you're like happy with it. Do you think that you feel a bit lonely in that process of writing and that sort of translates into the book itself.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, you might be right. Here's the psychoanalysis. But I think you might be right, you know, because it's a claustrophobic, certainly, process. You're writing in a vacuum, kind of stuck.
Why is it claustrophobic?
I think because you've got these characters packed inside your head, and a lot of the time, particularly with The Unwilding, I was having I had a lot of question marks around structure and perspective, and I really just wanted help from someone. I wanted some advice on how to kind of, did they think this was the right thing to do, or they did it, and I couldn't get that, because in order to get someone so included and so clued up on what had happened and what was going on in my head that they'd be able to give me any kind of useful answer, I would have just let the whole thing go, you know.
Yeah. Just words on it all over them.
Yeah, and I would feel, I think, because it was so unformed at that point, I feel like I'd compromised something, I reckon. That's the word vomit. So that feeling is really claustrophobic, because you're just kind of, you kind of can't get out. Like, there's a problem that you just, and it's really hard to leave it behind in the shower, and it's just like, oh, but what you. But then I think the claustrophobia of it is that's probably what gives your writing that propulsive kind of energy.
Yeah.
You probably need it. You need it to be quite uncomfortable.
Yeah. So where do you tend to write best? Because the settings of your novels aren't always in London, even though you're born and raised here and you still live here.
Yeah.
So where does that come from? Why do you like the heat of the setting? I mean, I know I love it. I like, you know, writing, reading things and warm countries. I think it adds to the atmosphere a little bit.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Something about a heat wave that really packs pressure on.
Exactly. But where do you write best, and why did you choose to set them?
So the Nightingale, I think I had spent a lot of time in a small, not very picturesque, but very kind of remote village in France, in a different area of France. But so the village of Nightingale is fictional, but I felt like I knew that landscape really well.
Do you picture it in your head?
Feeling of it. Yeah, I've definitely got a strong picture of it. Do you?
Yeah. Even when she goes on her runs, I know where she's
going. Me too. That's the problem when a book that you like gets turned into a film.
Yeah.
No, that's not where she went for a run. It was more foresty. But yeah, so that world, I felt like I knew that place really well, or that then I fictionalized obviously a lot of it, and I was lucky enough to be able to write quite a lot of the novel when I was there. You know, I would spend like 5 days there at a time, and so I felt very immersed in the setting. And I think in Nightingale, to me, the place felt like almost as much of the character as some of the characters themselves. And then with The Unwilding, obviously it flits between these it's got parts 1, 2, and 3, each in a very different place.
Yeah. Do you think that was anything to do with the reflection of the characters, or do you think that was more?
I suppose there's something more. There's a kind of fracturing in that, isn't there, of like the different places, the different perspectives, different time frames. Nightingale is all, you know, it's kind of one, apart from flashbacks, it's kind of one timeline, small cast of characters, specific setting. And The Unwilding, like that fracturing, I suppose probably reflects, not in an intentional way, but it reflects a lot of what's happened to the Travers family. They kind of split and diffracted and gone in different directions, and again, setting the location feels really important to me in each of the parts.
Do you pick them intentionally? Or?
With West Virginia, in part 3, that was quite, you know,
pin a tail on a donkey.
Yeah. And then I went from there, and then certain things kind of pop up based on the location, and end up doing research into the location, and then kind of different ideas come along. So actually the place that you choose ends up really informing what can really inform the plot and the story line. I think with part 1 opening in Sicily, it didn't have to be Sicily trying to have a particular connection. Sicily, it's a
Yeah.
great place, but I think the
Lemon.
yeah, exactly, it's lovely. Sardines, but it's kind of, it had to be somewhere glamorous but not manicured, and so probably that feels like quite a Don Travers
Oh
Bohemian
yeah, for
family
sure,
home setting.
for sure. And then so you've got like, as you said, this very kind of almost claustrophobic setting, very small village, very like small cast of characters in Nightingale, and then you sort of almost evolve into, you know, 3 locations, a slightly larger cast of characters.
Yeah.
Do you think that was an evolution of your own writing, or did you just really want to explore?
And I think I found it really hard adjusting to it, and
Oh, really?
yeah, and I kept thinking, is this okay? Am I diffracting it too much? And I think I worried a little bit about that as I was going along, and now I feel that it really fits the book and the characters and story. Yeah, I would say it was more structurally more complicated to write, but I liked that. It felt a new set of challenges.
Did you feel like you were like pushing yourself out of your comfort zone? Would you do something similar again? Or
Definitely. Yeah. It was very satisfying once the pieces started to fit together properly, and I felt like that's how it's all gonna. I think that that was incredibly satisfying. That said, as you know, right now I have the sense that I'd quite like to just do something that feels quite enclosed. But it's weird, isn't it? Because there's kind of, you're talking about solitude and loneliness, and there's the loneliness of a kind of a really isolated, remote, rural setting, and then there's such loneliness as well in a big city, and it's such a different kind of there's an anonymity in a big city that you know, Henri could never grow up having, and probably would have benefited from massively in Nightingale. But yeah, setting is so, it must shape so much of what we write.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because, as like I said before, you've grown up in London. You probably know it like the back of your hand now. Would there ever be a part of you that would want to write a novel set in London,
like a London novel? Yeah, I think so. And I love reading London novels.
Oh,
I think like I say, as Zadie Smith, kind of NW or something.
Yeah.
But or I love Saturday by A.M. McEwen. You know, because it's like you know the landscape so well. Well, I do obviously as a Londoner, but I think anyway, it's so much of, and I think that's probably where I would also come up against some struggles. I love the creativity of having non-specific location.
Okay.
To be able to describe. I love writing place. And if you're writing London,
it's also so like structured already as it is.
People know it.
Yeah.
So you're not really, you're writing something that's recognizable to people already.
Yeah.
Even if it's some kind of obscure side street.
Enough
people know of that side street, you know, you kind of. And so part 2 of The Unwilding, where I've set it in Greenwich, which is where I live, so I know that really, really well, but I fictionalized, you know, I had to fictionize certain elements, like you turn left instead of turning right, things like that. Otherwise, honestly, I would get too many people coming to me being like, so which house is it on Croom's Hill that they lived in? And I'm like, no, it's not. Yeah, got to have some kind of freedom. Right?
Yeah. If you could choose one novel that was already published that you'd want to write, which would it be? That you wish you'd written?
Yeah. Okay. Caris Davies. I don't know if you've read her novels, but she's written 3, I think. I think just 3. I guess they're novels, but they're kind of almost novellas. They're very small and they're vast in scope and setting, and then really concise. They're like little perfectly formed bullets in so many ways, like not a word is out of place. And they're so structurally tight. And she's done all this extraordinary research into them, and they're so full of humor. Like she really gets the kind of ridiculousness of people, which she writes with real compassion, but also in a totally unsentimental way. She will capture the complete tragedy and kind of abominations and the cruelty that can happen within human lives as well. And I don't know how she does that with the lightest touch. But I feel like if I've just finished her third, I think it's her third. So it's West, the Mission House, and Clear.
Okay.
I just finished Clear, and I just feel like if I'd written any of those three, I'd feel so bad. Because what she's pulled off
You'd be
is
like,
just
Ma, I made it.
Incredible. Yeah.
And do you draw inspiration when you read a lot of novels? Do you draw inspiration for your own writing, or do you think you kind of found
I think
your
I
own
try
style?
not to.
Yeah.
Try really hard not to, and I'm sure, I think, all writers are magpies, and there's an element to which you can't fight that. That's part of the beauty, I guess, of reading, and then you're learning all the time that you're reading. But I really try, like when I'm writing something, I'll think quite carefully about what I'm reading, because I really don't want to. I know that I can be quite porous, and I just don't want to be absorbing suddenly someone else's voice. And I've had to put a book down before that I'm reading, because I'll suddenly realize that my sentences are changing. Like my prose style is slightly, if they've got a kind of very distinctive style, the style just starts to find its way into your own writing. Like, no, okay, I'm going to revisit you later.
Yeah. So what do you tend to read while you write?
I'll try to read things that are really unconnected from what I'm working on. Feel unconnected, definitely in terms of style.
Yeah.
And preferably setting, or
Do you tend to read a lot when you write?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Because some people just can't,
can they? Yeah.
Put it all down.
Yeah.
Separate, what they're writing, and just go into a cocoon.
I think I do. Yeah. Yeah. And it's weird when you. I think my favorite part of writing a novel is maybe kind of 70-80% of the way through, and just everything that you read, or even, I don't know, a random song will come on your Spotify, and you're forging connections just all the time. You're like, everything suddenly feels connected to the novel.
Really?
Yeah, it's
what
really
kind of
cool. And I think that's when you're really in the thick of it. Just everything seems connected. Could it be some new story that you pick up and you're like, oh my God, that's, and I think Anne Enright, who I love, she said something like, I read an interview with her once when she was in that kind of stage of it, and she says, I keep bumping into it.
Oh.
And that really put it so perfectly, because that is how it feels. It feels like you're just constantly bumping into your own novel.
How do you think your family deal with that? Just on a personal level, my partner is very much, when he's immersed, he's so immersed that like it's almost difficult to get through to him sometimes.
Yes. Yeah.
How do you think you are able to sort of like get past that in terms of you've got your family?
Yeah. I suppose it's a weird one. I finished writing Nightingale just before I became a mum for the first time.
Oh wow.
Yeah. I probably finished the final sentence about 4 weeks before my first daughter was born. Yeah. And so
was that a relief?
Yeah.
Do you think it would have changed had you written it before and during and after?
Yes.
How?
I wonder. I wrote part 1 of The Unwilding when I was pregnant with my second.
Okay.
And then I wrote parts 2 and 3 when she was I picked it up again, like 7-8 months later. And definitely, I think it brought in different concerns. And I think perhaps I'd already been on mat leave once, right? But then I'd just done my second when I really started to kind of go into Don Travis's character. And I've thought about it. I think there's such an invisibility that happens to a new mum in the really early stages of motherhood, and he embodies everything that's kind of externally recognized as successful or powerful and visible, and so I think that kind of feeling of invisibility coming up against what, like, who are visibly, recognizably achieving in the world, and then the character of Lydia, the mother, she's this amazing character that gives herself over, and yet she will never be recognized. She'll for everything she's done.
I think it's so interesting you say that about Don, and that you kind of wrote him while you were sort of pregnant, and the dichotomy between the invisibility with this embodiment of success. Do you think that there was a part of you while writing Don that held resentment against him?
Yeah, I think definitely there's a kind of I would never write a character to represent something, because that wouldn't be interesting to me. Like I want to write a character that feels real.
Complex.
Yeah. And yet I think to a large degree, in the way that quite a few real life men that we've probably both met and know, to a very real degree, he does represent the patriarchy.
Yeah.
He is easy, unquestioned, entitled patriarchal power.
Yeah.
Like he's money, he's knowledge, he's wealth, he's
the house of the silly.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I think perhaps writing with an undercurrent of anger can be useful.
Did it fuel the character?
Probably, yeah. Some of the frustration, perhaps, I said earlier about how in The Unwilding it was frustrating for me to write him not having his kind of comeuppance. But it felt really important to me as I went along that he doesn't, because I don't think that felt true to me of him. I think he probably is one of the guys that just gets away with it. And he wouldn't think has ever done anything, vastly terrible. And yet it's that kind of the total complacency of not understanding his power.
Yeah.
And how to use it and its effect.
It's interesting you say that, because a lot of people use books, Agatha Christie wrote her books as a way for people to escape, for people to get the happily ever after.
Yes.
And yet you're saying that you want to write characters who, reflect, okay, maybe not everything is a happily ever after.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
Was that sort of like, does that compel you?
Yeah, probably. I think I love a book that gives the happily ever after. Probably it's quite a hard thing to pull off. And it can be pulled off, definitely. But in a way, for me, it would have to be in a way that felt totally true to the characters.
Yeah. And it didn't feel true to...
No, it would feel like I was tying something up with a bow.
Yeah. So you said you started writing at the age of 4, 5. If you weren't an author or a writer, what do you think you would have done?
Yes, okay. So I have this... I'm obsessed with, which I think you are too, with people and what goes on in people's heads. Like, there's nothing that I find more interesting than that. And that's probably why I'm an author. I am kind of endlessly fascinated by that. And so I fear that if I hadn't gone into the writing world, I might have tried to train as a kind of psychotherapist or a psychologist.
Why do you fear that?
And I fear that because
you would have been so good.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it's an awesome career. Amazing. I think that, like I was saying about the kind of porousness of I have to be careful what I'm reading when I'm writing, because I think in the same way, I reckon, I don't know, I think I would really struggle with feeling porous
Keeping
toward,
boundaries.
yeah. And so, you know, therapists, I'd so admire the ability to kind of hold up those barriers. I think I would just end up being really depressed.
Yeah. Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Even though, as you said, I am so similar in regards to just being so curious.
And sometimes I wish that I could be more interested, that I would have a wider range of interest in some ways, you know, because I just get so endlessly fascinated by people and you know, the differences between them and their inner motivations. And but yeah, also perhaps part of the risk of going into a career in psychotherapy or something is that maybe you would stop being fascinated, because after a while you would just get so
bogged down.
Yeah.
And
that would be sad, I think, to lose that fascination. But I mean, one thing that I do when I'm not writing, and I don't have much space for at the moment, but is I edit and mentor other writers.
Okay.
That I love, because and that I could see, if I couldn't be an author myself, that's all I did, I would feel very fulfilled by that.
Really?
Yeah, I think
you wouldn't feel like, oh my god, I really want to go and do this myself.
I wonder. I don't know, because I've never done it without also writing. But I think
you get your cake and you get to eat
it. Yeah. But I don't know. There's something about working on someone else's manuscript with them when they're stuck, or they can't find their way out, and trying to unlock it for them, or trying to, and I guess this is again where perhaps a degree of there's quite a lot of psychological stuff going on, because the main thing you've got to be doing then is putting yourself in their head and work out what are they trying to achieve, and then how can I try and get them to achieve it, not how can I interfere in their book and make it what I think it should be, you know?
Yeah.
You've really got
it's the guidance. It's
sort of like
step
into their So
do you get ideas from when you mentor, or you just like, that's their thing?
Yeah, that's their thing. Yeah, I would feel so
literary theft.
Yeah,
coming from Marina Kemp.
I was like, that's quite an interesting ending. Yeah. Well, that would be. God, I hope that dilemma never presents itself to me. I'm sure I'd do the honourable thing.
In terms of any upcoming projects or a third novel, do we have anything in the horizon?
So I've just like finished mat leave number 3, basically.
Okay.
So I haven't been able to. Thank you. That's it now. But I haven't been able to kind of really get my teeth into another writing project since I finished the manuscript of The Unwilding, which was obviously quite a bit before publication. So it's been quite a scarily long time. But I've got these 2 projects, and I'm trying to see. You know, I was talking about how I love the point at which you're kind of 70 to 80% of the way through the book, and you're bumping into it all the time. Like,
yeah.
Words. The other wonderful part for me, between I think 30% and 70%, is a bit horrible, that bit of writing the novel, because it's just painful, nitty gritty, trying to come to terms with it, work out what needs to happen. But the opening, like the beginning, is such a great stage, because you have kind of infinite directions that you can go in. But it's also really terrifying, because you don't really 100% know yet that anything has legs. And so, yeah, these 2 projects that I'm trying not to chase them away, and writing into both of them, and we'll see what happens.
So off the back of that, what do you think your favorite part of like the writing process is, in terms of, because you said that the opening bit, and then there's like the really grueling, getting to 80,000 words and being like, where's the end? But what's your favorite part?
I think the bumping into everything stage.
Yeah,
it's just so cool. It's like, it feels a little bit supernatural, because the amount of connections that get sparks to random things, it feels so weird that it feels like everything's coincidence, and that's really magical. It's a bit like you know, when you're cutting wrapping paper, and you're like kind of having to cut, and then sometimes it just glides.
Yeah.
The scissors just glide
without tearing.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a great feeling. And that's what I feel like at that
I love
stage.
that
I'm like,
metaphor.
I'm just a pair of scissors gliding, and it's so nice. And then
I'll think of that next time I read your novels.
Yeah,
just
and
the pair of
tell,
scissors gliding.
I still remember the scenes that I've written where I've really just. I don't know if you remember the scene. There's a conflict scene between Jerome and his youngest son Thibaut.
Yes.
I think he's his youngest son. It's been so long since I've read it.
Yeah.
But that conflict zone, I felt like that scene was really troubling me. I knew it had to happen, and I knew it was going to be difficult. And then I just sat down, and the scissors went like that, and it was just the most incredible. I remember where I was sitting. I remember everything about it. And they're just some scenes that you just, for whatever
even
reason,
in my mind, I can see it so vividly.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad.
And I can understand why it had to happen as well. And I just I love that you just can, you know. I know you say that you don't really want to wrap everything up with a bow, but like it does feel like sometimes these scenes come together so you know, harmoniously, and it's just like, although it's not harmonious scene, it's also like it just comes together so naturally, and it's so lovely to read and beautifully written. Thank you so much for.
Thank you. This has been so nice.